Anyone approaching Dickens's last unfinished novel for the first time, highly recommended by the way, will be immediately struck by the following most un-Dickensian opening paragraph, composed of short sentences and rhetorical questions. An ancient English cathedral tower? How can the ancient English cathedral tower be here? The well-known massive grey square tower of its old cathedral? How can that be here? There is no spike of rusty iron in the air between the eye and it from any point of the real prospect. What is the spike that intervenes, and who has set it up? Maybe it's set up by the Sultan's orders for the impaling of a horde of Turkish robbers one by one. It is so, for cymbals clash and the Sultan goes by to his palace in long procession. 10,000 scimitars flash in the sunlight, and thrice 10,000 dancing girls strew flowers. Then follow white elephants, caparisoned in countless gorgeous colours and infinite in number and attendance. The questions give way to fantastical imaginings, and it soon becomes clear that we've been invited to enter the fuddled brain of John Jasper, a cathedral organist by profession, but an opium smoker for pleasure, following his pipe dreams in an East End opium den. The questions I'm going to address in this video are: what information and experiences was Dickens's personal knowledge of opium founded on? And, more generally, what was the status of opium in mid-Victorian England? Starting with the immediate inspiration for the scene which Dickens describes in the first chapter of Edwin Drood, we know from his correspondence that Dickens in 1869 made at least one visit to the East End den of Opium Sal with former Inspector Field of Scotland Yard, his business manager George Dolby, and the American illustrator Sol Aiting. He also consulted Sir John Bowring, a former governor of Hong Kong, about opium smoking in China as part of his background research for the novel. In a letter to Bowring, Dickens wrote, just a month before his death, that the opium smoking that he described in the opening scene of John Jasper at Princess Puffer's den, I saw, exactly as I have described it, penny ink bottle and all, down in Shadwell this last autumn. Opium smoking was generally frowned on as a disreputable habit, engaged in by sailors and lowlifes in the dock areas of cities such as London, Liverpool and Bristol. It was not, however, proscribed, as evidenced by the fact that Dickens was able to stroll in and out of an opium den in the company of a senior police officer. So what exactly was the status of opium? And why would a plot which features the use and abuse of the substance have resonated so strongly with Dickens's readers? First, a quick lesson in pharmacology and natural history. So, what exactly is opium and where does it come from? Opium is an exudate from the seed pod of the poppy Papaver somniferum, and it can be obtained by scoring the outside of the immature pods and then collecting the milk once it has congealed and hardened, or else by processing the complete poppy plant known as poppy straw. Raw opium is intensely bitter, but it can be eaten in various forms, dissolved in alcohol and drunk, or smoked in a number of ways, including chasing the dragon. Opium's principal active ingredients are morphine, codeine and thebaine, and it's both a powerful analgesic or painkiller and a dangerous narcotic drug, producing a wide range of sensations from euphoria and vivid waking dreams to deep depression, uncontrollable cravings and death. The properties and uses of opium have been known and exploited since antiquity by the Greeks and the Egyptians, as well as by the civilizations of the Middle and Far East. The opium poppy may well have originated in the Eastern Mediterranean, but it's been selectively bred and hybridized for centuries and can be successfully cultivated in a variety of climatic conditions right around the world. For our purposes, it's important to concentrate on the cultivation of opium poppies in India, specifically under the aegis of the English East India Company in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. Large tracts of land were given over to opium poppies, the produce of which was then shipped over to China to trade in exchange for tea and silk, which was in turn brought over to England. Tens of millions of Chinese became enslaved to the narcotic power of opium, and the imperial powers attempted to ban the import of this pernicious drug. From 1839, an opium war was fought between the British and the Chinese, with the British complaining about protectionism and insisting that the Chinese continue to accept their dangerous drugs. The British won and secured a 150-year lease on the port of Hong Kong as part of the settlement in 1842. Hostilities flared up again in the late 1850s, and a second opium war led to the British occupying the forbidden city of Peking, which the commander intended to raze to the ground. Instead, the Empress's Pekingese dogs were taken away and brought over to England, where one of them, Lootie, was presented to the British Imperial Majesty, Queen Victoria. That was one of the lowest points of the entire British imperial project, and one that was not dwelt on at any length in school histories of Britain. However, what it does highlight is the commercial importance of opium and the fact that it was freely traded around the world and produced and consumed in considerable quantities. The medicinal properties of opium were praised by early men of science, including Paracelsus, who coined the name Lordanum for a liquid preparation of the drug. This was further developed by Thomas Sydenham in the mid-17th century, and by the late 18th century, laudanum was a standard component in the pharmacopoeia of Britain and continental Europe. In this form, it was used and abused by millions, including the Romantic poets Coleridge, Keats and Shelley, and the English opium eater Thomas de Quincey, whose Confessions are a foundational text for the genre of drug-taking autobiographies. What exactly was laudanum, though, and how was it intended to be used? There was no standard recipe for laudanum other than it should contain roughly 10% of opium and be dissolved in an alcohol medium. It was commonly mixed up with a variety of powerful stimulants and poisons, including mercury, hashish, cayenne pepper, ether, chloroform, belladonna, whiskey, wine and brandy. The intention was that it should be measured out by a dropper, as any more than 2 or 3 teaspoons was considered a lethal dose. As a medicine, it was prescribed as an anodyne for virtually any physical pain, for fevers, gastric disorders, epilepsy, coughs and nervous ailments. In short, it was the go-to remedy for Victorian households. However, as De Quincey discovered to his cost, what may have started as a treatment for pain relief could rapidly turn into a habit indulged in for pleasure. His dose of 300 drops of laudanum increased dramatically until he was taking 12,000 drops a day, and he thought nothing of spending a winter's evening at home in front of a roaring fire with a 2-pint bottle of laudanum at his side. The pleasures of opium then gave way to the agonising pains of opium, as De Quincey was beset by terrifying fantasies, nightmares and physical torture whenever he tried to wean himself off his enslavement to the drug. Up to now, I've deliberately avoided using the terms addict or addiction, as this notion of physical dependence on a harmful substance only entered medical literature in the early 20th century. For the Victorians, overindulgence in either opium or alcohol would have been considered a bad habit, possibly attributable to a hereditary weakness or simply due to having a bad character. The laissez-faire calculation was made that the benefits of opium outweighed its drawbacks and that individuals should exercise personal responsibility in its use. As well as being foisted on the Chinese, opium was imported into Britain by the ton, mostly from Turkey, and openly traded on the London market. There was no control over dispensing opium, and not only could it be freely purchased in pharmacies, but it could even be picked up from general stores. The Pharmacy Act of 1868 was the first attempt to limit the sale of the raw drug, but this still made no provision for preparations made from or containing opium, including a wide range of proprietary medicines. Opium, it should be noted, and despite Princess Puffer's protestations to the contrary in Edwin Drood, was relatively cheap, and a swig of laudanum or an opium pill, enough for a quick hit, could be purchased for as little as a penny, making it much cheaper than alcohol. Agricultural and factory workers would often start their laborious days in this way, while their wives would have a bottle of opium mixture at the ready to calm their own nerves and to administer to sick or crying children. And at the apex of British society sat Queen Victoria, perhaps not greatly amused, but certainly with an inner glow, as she was a habitual user of laudanum, as well as taking preparations of cannabis, morphine and cocaine. What then of Charles Dickens and his dealings with opium? From his correspondence we can find several instances when he resorted to laudanum as a painkiller dating back to the mid-1830s. Then he suffered from tic douloureux, an excruciating nerve pain in the face, and precisely the problem which started De Quincey on his slippery slope of dependence. Dickens also used it to treat kidney stones, bouts of coughing and catarrh, and a prolonged battle with gout on his American reading tour. It's unlikely that Dickens himself considered that he had an opium habit, but he was a regular user in his last years, and there were undoubtedly occasions when he took more than the recommended dose, enabling him to personally experience the pleasures and pains associated with the recreational use of the drug. His close friend Wilkie Collins, on the other hand, became massively dependent on laudanum during the last 25 years of his life, and regularly took doses that would have killed a horse. He made the use of opium an important plot component in his 1868 bestseller, The Moonstone, the most obvious immediate influence on Dickens when writing Edwin Drood. For the Victorians, it was not a question of whether opium should be used or not, but rather a matter of how it should be consumed. Laudanum was considered the most civilised way of ingesting the drug, either as a therapeutic or as a narcotic. Pills and potions laced with opium were for women, children and for working men, whereas opium smoking was considered a degrading practice that could at best be tolerated but not condoned. Let's return to the Mystery of Edwin Drood as it first appeared in monthly parts, and take a look at the advertising material which accompanies it. Here we can find encomiums for Dr. Locock's pulmonic wafers and for Kay's Warsdale pills, guaranteed to purify the blood and strengthen the system. Active ingredients of both products? Opium. Just above the latter is a half-page ad for J. Collis Brown's Chlorodyne, recommended as a remedy for coughs, consumption, bronchitis, asthma, neuralgia, diarrhea, cholera, dysentery, epilepsy, palpitations and spasms. It will now come as no surprise to discover that this popular patent medicine, freely administered to children and babies as well as to adults, had as its principal active ingredients opium, alcohol, cannabis and chloroform. With such a potent cocktail at one's bedside, it can well be believed that invalids would indeed obtain quiet, refreshing sleep, free from headache, relief from pain and anguish, as well as, quite possibly, visions of processions of elephants and dancing girls beyond number. Sweet dreams.